I would like to kick things off with our keynote presenter this morning, Dr. Becca Jablonski. Dr. Jablonski has been to Kansas a few times now. Some of you may have attended the Harvesting Opportunities Symposium held in Lawrence in 2018, where folks from all over Kansas gathered to learn and ignite ideas around growing our regional food systems. The symposium built on the 2017 guide published by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis Communities, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, called Harvesting Opportunity, the Power of Regional Food System Investments to Transform Communities. Dr. Jablonski is one of the authors who contributed to this guide and was a key presenter at the symposium in Lawrence. There's still a lot of momentum and energy around the ideas presented at this symposium, and in fact, KRC developed some written pieces on following up on that symposium and have those on our website and shared those out via the news just recently. So if you haven't seen those, check those out. But there is still a lot of momentum, and so we've invited Becca back to further expand, especially on the relationship between urban and rural, and thinking outside the box to help strengthen local and regional food systems. So, in addition to her role at Colorado State University, Dr. Jablonski facilitates the Colorado Governor's Food Systems Advisory Council and is the co-leader of the Colorado State University's Food Systems Extension team. So, without further ado, I'd like to please welcome Dr. Becca Jablonski, our keynote presenter this morning.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much to everybody at KRC for inviting me here today. I have actually been back to Kansas now a few times, and it's really great fun to be here, especially because at least the eastern half of our state, looks very similar. So I'm hopeful that there's a bunch of work that we're doing in Colorado that is useful to sort of hearing about here. Also, I think if you are not excited about hearing economists at 9 in the morning, you have to blame KRC folks for that too. So try to keep the data down. And also, it was really inspiring. Thank you for inviting me last night for the 40th anniversary celebration. My husband just filed paperwork within the last couple weeks here to start a nonprofit, and I will say, it was really inspiring to see an organization that has actually done it. So thank you for that, because of course there's many more examples, right, of some challenges. So with that, I think this is an image that is probably increasingly familiar, right? We have a grocery store, and I apologize, maybe it's a little bit hard to see, that's got a local food section, right? They're labeling some state-grown product, right? Indeed, every state now in the country has some kind of branding program. So you have your Kansas branding program. We have ours, the Colorado Proud program. In addition, in this store, they're also leveraging other federal programs to try to, support some double-up food dollar programs. People familiar with the double-up, right, where you can basically use your food stamps or to try to basically be able to buy more local healthy products. And so we see that there has sort of been this proliferation, in this case by the private and public sector, to try to incentivize the purchase of local products in an effort to try to create new market opportunities for farmers and ranchers, and an effort to try to also get people to buy more healthy products. Whether or not local is healthier is a whole other issue, but that's what these programs are trying to do. And so this is showing that we have had at the federal level a huge number of programs that have really been put in place to try to develop these types of local buying efforts, right? So these are selected programs that have come through the Farm Bill since 2008. Indeed, we've had many of these programs actually made mandatory and permanent in the most recent Farm Bill. And I was recently going back and looking at some of the titles in the Farm Bill right from the 80s, and you can see that then it was all the commodity programs, right? That's what the titles were. And of course now we have local and regional food system efforts that are embedded in many, many of the titles. titles, right? I think they're in at least 6 or 7 of the titles now. And so it's really interesting, I think, to see how that shift has taken place across the federal government. In addition, we also have a proliferation of a number of food policy councils across North America. So Johns Hopkins does a really nice job of trying to track what's happening in the food policy council space. They do an annual survey, and actually they're going to be having their first ever food policy council convening coming up a year from now, so stay tuned for more information. So as I said, there's over 300 of these councils that are active across North America, and I actually had a student recently go through all of the councils and went to their websites to find out how many of them had created some kind of plan. 52 of them had created a plan since 2010. Unfortunately, when we looked for words like rural-urban linkages, there were only 2 councils that really explicitly talked about that. And I will say that the Kansas City Food Policy Council was one of them. But I think it shows there's a lot of effort, right, that could be put into thinking about not just the council dealing with maybe the territory it does, but how do we actually build some of these bridges, and I'll come back to that. So one of the things that the Johns Hopkins Center has done is try to categorize the types of things that the food policy councils are doing. And the one that I wanted to draw your attention to is this yellow area that's really focused around procurement. Because I think that procurement creates some of these opportunities to support rural-urban linkages really explicitly. And though the councils do not always have jurisdiction around school food purchasing, right? So like in Colorado, where I'm very familiar, we have some reciprocal arrangement in terms of the bid process, right? So if a distributor has gone through the bid process for the city and county, that qualifies for the schools, but the city and county doesn't actually have jurisdiction over the schools per se. But anyway, I think tied in this, right, they're trying to bring school districts into this conversation, and part of the reason is that we have over 100,000 schools across the United States representing over 30 million kids, and we have a $13 billion national school lunch program, right? So the idea here is how do we leverage some of that money to actually create new, expanded markets for farmers and ranchers, and I think a lot of thought is also around maybe where there's a premium around some kind of local identification. And so on the right here, this is information the National Farm to School Network has been collecting around some of the state policies that have been proposed and actually enacted around school food. And you can see that by far and away, the most frequently proposed bill has been around local procurement. And indeed, we've had over 20 of these bills that have passed across the United States, including in Colorado. We just passed a pilot program that provides a per meal incentive for schools that are purchasing a certain amount of local products, right? So this is something that's happening, and a lot of times it's being pushed by these councils. And so in Denver, we've been doing work to try to understand, well, not just within the schools themselves, but also, in the region and with the jails and other buyers, what type of spend are we actually looking at? And so far, we have a long way to go. We've been able to track over $45 million a year that's spent on food purchases, and only under $6 million is spent locally on those purchases. And so we're trying to get a better sense of what we're talking about, right? $6 million a year. For some commodities, they make a big difference. In other commodities, it's not going to make much of a difference, right? So through all of this, right, these interests in local procurement by these food policy councils, through school districts, we're really trying to push this idea that if you want to see local procurement, it is going to involve rural-urban linkages. And this is a slide I love to present in Denver because I think sometimes we lose track of the fact that we don't really have many urban farms, especially urban farms of scale. And that does not, I don't want to imply that urban farms cannot serve really important other purposes. In fact, I think we heard a great presentation yesterday about some of the other types of benefits that can come from urban agriculture. but in terms of where these municipalities are going to procure food, so according to the most recent Census of Agriculture, Denver County has 12 farms, and I have to say I work in Denver a lot, I can't name 12 farms. But according to the Census of Agriculture, they have 12 farms, and not a single one of them was over $100,000 in gross cash farm income, right? So we're talking about some small players. I don't want to only talk about Colorado here. I was involved in a study in the Northeast for a bunch of years. Before I came to Colorado in 2014, I spent 8 years working for Cornell and Cornell Cooperative Extension and did my PhD work there. And so we were looking at the economic impacts of the green markets, which is the largest network of farmers markets in the country. And so a colleague who was part of this actually mapped where the products were coming from to serve the New York City farmers market system. And you can see it's from a 9-state region, right? Of course, much smaller states than we have out here, but these are not products that are largely coming from New York City. Last word I just wanted to mention about urban agriculture quickly is that there have been some studies done. This was from a national study of 315 urban farms that was done by Carolyn Dimitri and Livia Oberhauser. Carolyn was actually at USDA Economic Research Service for a number of years and is now at New York University. And what they found is that from these surveys, only a quarter of producers of these urban farms actually even include anything around sort of markets, right, or earning a living in their mission statement. So that many of these urban farms have these other types of missions that they're trying to fulfill, right? And that we see when we look at these urban farms that even those that are making a living off the farm are not earning what I think most people would call sort of an income that people aspire to, right? It's a pretty low wage position. So I really want to hammer home that necessity to talk about urban-rural linkages if we're going to talk about local procurement at any sort of scale. So with that, we're talking about this opportunity. I think one of the challenges is that when I go and talk to groups across the country, there's this idea that our goal is around establishing these local and regional food systems. And I would challenge us that that is not the goal, right? That we're pursuing these things around local and regional food systems because we're trying to see if we're actually creating opportunities to support the next generation of agriculture. If we're creating opportunities to support small or veteran or beginning farmers and ranchers, right, who might be underserved in the current system. So we're trying to see, what are these farm and ranch profitability or viability impacts of these types of markets. And I think the other piece of it is around community economic development. And so I'm going to touch on what do we know about the impacts to both farms and ranches and communities from these types of strategies. And then I'm going to end with talking about what are some of the things that we're doing in Colorado to really promote these rural-urban linkages. So is there evidence that farmers and ranchers win from these types of strategies? So the first thing is that we have very good evidence that there is a willingness to pay a premium for products that are marked as local. And we can see this for lots of different markets and lots of different regions of the state. We have really good evidence. And it's not even just around local food, right? We have evidence that there's willingness to pay for lots of different types of differentiation strategies, right? That I think probably many in this room have talked about and pursued. But the question isn't, I don't think, just about that premium, because we know that there's different types of expenditures, right, that go into selling through local and regional food markets. Much of that's due to the fact that farmers and ranchers that are selling through those markets are taking on many additional supply chain functions, right? They're doing more of their own marketing and processing and distribution. And so here's a conceptual framework that we put together. Is anyone familiar with the Ag in the Middle group that's been around for a couple decades now? Okay, great. Ag in the Middle, I'm part of that group now and encourage many people to get involved. So they put together what you see in the middle there, that middle quadrant. And what we did was just to expand it in this conceptual framework. So if you're looking at the top left quadrant, right, that's around direct marketing. So we know that farmers and ranchers are getting a higher value per unit of sales, right, but that the sales volume tends to be lower through those kinds of markets, right? And then in the bottom right, we have the commodity markets, and again, you're going to have the opposite, where you have much higher sales volume, but you're going to have the lower value per unit, right? In these value chains, and of course this is an area where the Farm Bill has increasingly devoted money, right, to support things like food hubs or this local procurement that's specific to getting product into schools, as we've talked about, or getting product into restaurants and grocery stores. You know, there the idea is that you're going to get a little bit higher value per unit than you would get through a commodity market, but not as high through the direct markets, but that you can sell larger volumes. So all of these three strategies, you know, have paths to viable and profitable farms and ranches. What we want to avoid, what we think about a lot when we do our extension programming, is how to keep people out of that trouble zone, right? How to keep people out of this place where they're a commodity producer, but they don't have the scale that they need to be able to really achieve those economies of scale and be profitable, right? And I think the folks who are in that quadrant are the people who are most concerned about right now and really trying to think about opportunities to support. And I saw in one of the booths over there, there was some information about this dollar bill series, but I like this because I think it helps to illustrate this point, right? When you're in direct market channels, the farm share of that retail dollar is going to be higher, right? In fact, if you're selling through a farmer's market, you may actually keep all of it. And you're going to have a higher degree of managerial control and pricing power, but you're going to have this lower volume trade-off, right? That market value potential is going to be very low. And you know, for the intermediated markets, you're going to sacrifice some of that managerial control and that pricing power to achieve larger volumes. So one of the things we tried to look at in our research is where is sort of the optimal place for different producers to be based on what commodity they're producing and the scale of that operation. And so I'm only going to go through this very quickly today, but I do want to highlight that we have a lot of resources to try to provide more information on this kind of research. So with a colleague, Dawn Milne, who's also at Colorado State University, we've been running this community of practice that's been funded through the USDA Ag Marketing Service. It's technically an e-extension community practice, but you don't have to be part of extension to join it. It's called localfoodeconomics.com. And so we've been increasingly putting up different types of fact sheets. So anyway, there's a lot more information there if you're interested in following up, and of course you can always get back in touch with me. So just a few things I want to touch on. One is that the source of data that we use for almost all of this national evaluation that we do is the USDA's Agricultural Resource Management Survey. Has anyone ever filled that out? Has anyone here filled it out? Okay, well thank you, because we really need those data. The data are congressionally mandated, well the survey is congressionally mandated to focus on the core agricultural states. And so one of the challenges for us that work in diversified markets is that the core ag states don't tend to be most of where the local food system activity occurs. But that being said, the ARMS survey targets a sample of about 30,000 farms and ranches each year. They end up getting responses from about 17,000 producers, so pretty impressive. And of that sample of 17,000, about 1,000 of them participate in local and regional food markets. So it's where we've been able since 2008 to actually have some of the data that we need to be able to do this type of analysis. And I just want to say how important this is, because otherwise what happens is that we have individual researchers or individual nonprofits or organizations that are going out and doing their own survey work, and it ends up creating much more of a response burden on our producers than if we can concentrate on these national surveys and let them do what they're supposed to do. So, okay, with that, I'm going to move on. So, we have a sample of about 1,000 producers each year that participate in local and regional food markets. So one of the things that we've tried to understand are the variable expenses for farms and ranches that are selling to these markets. And the thing I want to highlight that I think is just so interesting is that when we divide our farms and ranches that sell through local food markets by scale, so you can see on the far left we have those that are 1,000 to 75,000, this is a gross cash farm income. Then we have 75 to 350, right? Of course, 350 and below is the USDA definition of a small farm, at least what Economic Research Service uses. 350 to a million, which is the definition of a mid-scale farm, and then a million and higher. And I just want you to pay attention to that orange, that sort of orange-reddish bar that you see goes up really high on the far right. Now remember, this is as percentage of total expenditure. That bar represents labor, and this is paid labor. So what we see here is that farms and ranches that are selling through these local food markets look sort of the opposite of what we think about in conventional agriculture. As these farms and ranches get larger, they are spending a significantly larger share of their total expenditure on labor. And our hypothesis here is that because they're taking on those supply chain functions, right, and because part of that premium that comes from local and regional food markets comes from those relationships, right, people want to understand more about the farm and the ranch, that there's really no shortcut to having that additional labor expenditure. And especially given that when I go and talk to the farmers and ranchers around Colorado right now, the thing I hear that is even more concerning than water challenges is labor. This may be a real issue moving forward, right? And because I often get the question, well, maybe it's because, especially at smaller scales, people don't actually have paid labor, and that's why we're seeing this. I can buy that if you're under $75,000 in gross cash farm income, right? Maybe you're using free interns or you've got family labor, but once you're getting close to that, over a couple $100,000, there's no way in these systems you don't have paid labor. So I don't think that accounts for it. So I want to highlight that, right? That labor is a really important component of these operations. So to the extent we can think about how to make labor utilization more efficient in these operations is really important. So the next thing we do, and I promise I'm not going to do too much data, this is like the little bitty part here, and you can all thank me that I did not include any equations, so that would have been really great on a Saturday morning. So now we take this sample of local food producers and we divide them into quartiles. Quartile 4 is going to be the top performer, and quartile 1 is the low performer. So here we're looking at the same scales that I mentioned earlier. So if you look at the orange and blue, this represents about 50% of our sample in each of those scale categories. And so basically half of our sample is losing money selling through these markets at any scale. Now, for those of you who are actually familiar with some of the financial implications of farming, this doesn't look dissimilar to general trends that we see in agriculture. And in fact, I would say that on the smaller scale, this actually looks better because what we see on the glass half full side is that about half the sample is either breaking even, which is why you don't really see those bars in the third quartile, or they're actually making money, right? And for return on assets, right, which is how we're measuring profitability here, these return on assets are actually pretty impressive. So I think the main takeaway that I really want you to get from this is that even at small scales, under 75,000 in gross cash farm income, I mean, that is a small operation. The fact that we see these top performers who are looking really good shows that there are opportunities through these types of markets at any scale. We just have to think about what is it that's more likely to make a farm be in that quartile 4, right? And we've been trying to do some research looking at that. I'm not going to present some of it today, but I'll tell you that part of it that we see is that efficient use of resources, which means that you don't necessarily need to own land, is an important component of what we see. So, and we have some fact sheets on that. This is the same information, but instead of looking at quartiles, now what we're doing is dividing by market channel. And I'll say that the ARMS data keeps getting better, so actually moving forward, starting with this 2019 survey, we're going to actually be able to do a lot more disaggregation by market channel, which is really exciting for people like me. So here all we can do is divide by direct-to-consumer channels, intermediated channels, and then farms and ranches that are selling through both. And here we see a similar type story, right, which is that we see about half the sample is breaking even or better. We do have that quartile 3 that's losing a little bit of money, but it is about break even. And we see that on average, the farms and ranches that are selling through intermediated markets are doing a little bit better. They're selling through intermediated markets only. Just a little bit, but they're still doing a little bit better. So as I said, if you want more information there, just go to localfoodeconomics.com and check out our fact sheets, and we'll be putting a lot more up there. So this is all really great information, and it gives us sort of this high-level picture of what we can see about farm profitability impacts by scale and by market channel for local food producers. But we wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And so one of the things that we were able to do through a grant from the USDA Ag Marketing Service through the FSMIP program, I don't know if anyone's applied for that, the Federal State Marketing Improvement Program, we were able to do something called market channel assessments. And these market channel assessments were created by some colleagues that I've worked with for a lot of years at Cornell, Matt LaRue and Todd Schmidt. And what we do with these market channel assessments is we focus on expenses by market channel. So we are not collecting any information on complete variable expenses. We start with harvest. So the idea is that if you're growing broccoli, your costs of production to grow broccoli are going to be the same regardless of what channel you sell through. But harvest can start to vary. For example, I like to use raspberries as an example. You know, if you go and you have to send labor to harvest your raspberries, that is extremely labor intensive, right? Versus if you have a pick your own operation and can actually get people to pay you to harvest your raspberries, that's a much better deal for you, right? So that's why we start there. The other two things that they include here that I think are really important and that we can't get through something like the ARMS data is information on lifestyle preferences and then farmer perception of risk. So for example, we see that restaurants tend to have a very high perception of risk because there's frequent turnover by chefs, right, or restaurateurs. Restaurants come and go. They tend to order small volumes, right, so they tend not to be great channels, and producers tend to perceive them as having high levels of risk, versus a community-supported agriculture arrangement. Everybody's paid on the front end, so you know even if something happens, right, you've already made your money and you're going to be okay. So we collect logs of all marketing labor from harvest to sale for a typical peak season week. So producers hate this because we have to go and spend a week with them during peak season, and they're a little busy at that time. So it's a hard sell to get them to do it, but I will tell you that those who participate have loved it. In fact, one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my job is having the opportunity to participate in the off-season conversations with growers where we've actually gone through these market channel assessments, and I mean, I think the producers are just really grateful to have this information. And they've used it in ways where they've actually been able to go to a chef to say, I have to increase my prices. Here's some information, you know, that Colorado State University researchers provided me. So anyway, so we collect this information for a week. We try to make it as easy as possible. So we use these labor logs. And we do a quick pre-interview where we ask about who the laborers are on the farm, so we can actually put individual names on there. If we're working with larger producers that have H2A crews, then we don't actually have them do it for each individual farm worker, but we have it for the entire crew. So like the crew manager would come and write it for the entire crew. And then we ask them beforehand about where they're selling their product, and we try to fill that in. And we really focus on labor because of that earlier slide that I showed you, right? We see that that's the largest variable expense for these farmers and ranchers that are selling through local food markets. And this is really the reason we do it during peak season, is that if we do not track labor during that peak season week, then we find that recollection is not great, right? Because most producers do a great job tracking sales by market channel, but they're not really tracking expenses by market channel. So that's why we do it then. And so here's an example of the type of information that we can get from it. This is what we call a marketing profit margin. We're calling it a marketing profit margin because, as I said, we don't collect complete variable expense information. So this is just for intermediated channels. So on the far left, you can see all intermediated channels, and then we have it broken out by sales to a distributor, sales to a grocery store, sales to a restaurant, and other. A lot of that other categories like farm to school sales, for example, that the producers actually selling directly to the school. So the orange dot there in the middle is the median, and then we have the 75th percentile in the yellow and the bottom 25th percentile in the green. And, you know, I was sort of picking on restaurants earlier, but you can see that, you know, restaurants really have a lot of variability in performance, and that those bottom, you know, the people who are in that bottom 25th percentile are certainly losing money, right, because we're not including all those complete variable expenses there. So I think this information has been really helpful, and because we've been able to start establishing these benchmarks, now when we actually go out and do market channel assessments, based on the information we get from an individual grower, we can put them, you know, we can mark where their farm is, you know, in terms of this continuum. And I think that really helps them to then try to think about, okay, how do I get more efficient? So just as a quick example in direct markets, we've seen that some of our direct market producers, because they're trying to think about labor efficiency, have now started to have their CSA pickup at the farmer's market, right? So that they're not sitting and waiting for people to come to the farm, which ends up taking a lot of time. And also that means that they at least have some sales even on a day when it's rainy and people aren't coming to the market. So lots more information on these market channel assessments, including complete benchmarks, on our website. This is on our CSU website, foodsystems.colostate.edu. And the last thing before I turn it over to the community impacts piece is that we've used this information in our Beginning Farmer and Rancher program that we run through CSU Extension. So we've trained over 500 aspiring farmers and ranchers through this program. I actually did the evaluation of it a few years ago. We had some really, I think, impressive impacts from this program. And having this type of financial information, both through market channel assessments and also through the ARMS data, has been really important. Okay, so what are the implications for communities, right? This is the community wins thing. This is something else we hear quite often. So the first thing is that many times when I go and talk to communities, they're interested in hearing about the economic impacts of these types of local and regional food systems. And in fact, I think I'm doing a session right after this, I think it's right after this, on how to evaluate the economic impacts of local and regional food systems. But I will say that most of the people that I end up going and talking to, and we've trained, I think, thousands of people across the US now, aren't really interested in knowing what the economic impacts are. And I should say, I mentioned I was in New York for about 8 years, so I worked as an agricultural economic development specialist for Cornell Cooperative Extension before I went back and did my PhD. And part of the reason that I went and did my PhD in trying to understand the economic impacts of these types of initiatives was that there really wasn't an agreed upon methodology for how to do this, and there really wasn't a lot of information. But I knew that because I was trying to always get funding and continue to get funding for my position from our local elected officials, that this is what they wanted to know about, right? This is, of course, they want to see what their return on investment is in the communities. So overall, we see that there are small, short-term, but positive impacts that occur from these systems. But I would say it's not anything that's that impressive. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but I think it's because through these types of efforts that where we have seen the much bigger impacts and important impacts are from some of these sort of longer-term, harder-to-measure type things, which we'll talk about. So I was part of a team that was pulled together by the USDA Marketing Services, and it was led by my colleague, Dawn Filmany, and it was ag economists across the country that were working in this space, trying to understand the economic impacts of local and regional food systems. And we put together a toolkit on how to do this, and I encourage you to go and take a look. The things that I wanted to caution everyone about, and why I think we see that there are these small, short-term economic impacts, is that when we have finite resources, so it's not like there's extra land that's just kind of sitting around waiting for someone to farm it, right? And so we really focus on we need to measure the net and not the gross impacts, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And that these net impacts, thinking about the net impacts, we need to account for factors that are both on the supply side and on the demand side, or both. So this is one of the first studies that came out that actually showed why we need to think about this by a guy named Dave Swenson, who's out of Iowa State, who's wonderful. And he did this study. The Midwest was really interested in trying to think about what if we try to grow enough fruits and vegetables to feed all of the people in our cities? What would that actually look like? And what Dave did was he said, well, it's not like in the Midwest we have land sitting around, right? So we have to pull it out of corn or soy, right, in order to be able to plant the vegetables we need. And so he did this impact assessment, and he finds that overall there's this positive effect, but it's much lower when you actually account for the fact that growing corn and soy has positive economic impacts in our communities, and we have to subtract that, right, from the change to vegetable production. We also really haven't done enough work in thinking about how do farmers respond to these new market opportunities. So what happens when we put in a farm-to-school program? Do our farmers and ranchers decide, okay, we're going to start planting a new amount of production to supply those schools, or we're going to start doing something differently so that we increase our scale? Or are we pulling product out of places where we already have markets, where we're selling that, right? In which case, the impact may be nothing, right? Or if you create a new farmer's market, but you already had a saturation of farmers markets in your region, you may not have new producers that now have market access. You might have a producer that's deciding to pull out of one market and go to another. And so again, the economic impact of that may be nothing. And so we really need to think about how do these producers respond to this new market opportunity and not make this assumption that it's going to be creating new market access, right, for these producers. You know, and are they ready to respond to that market opportunity? Do they have the right food safety protocol in place? Do they have access to appropriate infrastructure, right? All of these kinds of questions that are really pivotal to understanding, can we actually see the economic impact we want to see? So because we found, and I know this is being recorded and I probably shouldn't say this, but because we found that there may be some predatory consultants out there that are charging a lot of money for these economic impact assessments, we created a tool. It's just been launched in its beta version on that localfoodeconomics.com website. It integrates that ARMS data that I mentioned so that you can actually go and do a very basic economic impact assessment for your project, right? So if you're looking for a number to give to your local elected official and that's why you need it, this is a great tool to save you a lot of money. And if you want to talk about some of the assumptions that you should be putting in with your numbers, I would be happy to do that, or anyone on our team would be happy to do that. If you need a really rigorous economic impact assessment because you want to try to get this published in the peer-reviewed literature, this is not the place to go. But if you just need something to sell to someone, that's a good opportunity. And also a couple years ago, I put together with some colleagues a guide to how to do economic impact assessments for farm-to-school programs, so I encourage you to take a look at that if that's something you're interested in. So I said that I think it's these long-term impacts that are likely where we're going to see more important impacts. So one is something, a farmer's market serves as a business incubator. And you're not going to actually be able to evaluate the ability to give somebody the skills, right, to train somebody to be a long-term successful entrepreneur in a short-term economic impact assessment. So we're not capturing things like that, and that may be a really important impact of a farmer's market, right? That having conversations with consumers through direct markets may help to circulate knowledge and ideas, right? People might get new ideas that they then create, and again, that's going to be a longer-term impact than what you're going to see in a short-term assessment, right? And gaining those skills and business experiences is really important. And we actually did a study of this in that project I mentioned with the Flea Markets in New York City. And so we interviewed the farmers that were selling through these markets, and we also talked to almost, I think, 900 customers that were selling or they're buying at these markets. And we found that there was a lot of exchange that happens at these markets. So almost a third of consumers or farmers market managers shared ideas with producers. Now that may not seem like a lot, right? You said a third, but has anyone ever been to the Union Square Farmers Market in New York City? Anyone ever been there? Well, on a Saturday in October, they have 400,000 people a day who walk through there. So it's an anomaly, right? There's no other markets like that in the country, but you're talking about a lot of ideas, right? And we found that 75% of producers actually made changes to their operations based on ideas that they got. But I think even more important is that 82% reported that they shared ideas with farmers or were going to share them with farmers or ranchers in their home communities in rural places, right? And so you can see that there's these spillover effects that happen because people are getting new ideas, because there's this exchange that's happening between urban and rural people. And indeed, this isn't causal, but at least in terms of correlation, we found that in places where you had farmers that were selling through these green markets, we found that the stocks of human capital were significantly higher, right? Okay, so we talked about the opportunities and we talked about what we know about impacts. So what are we doing about all of this in Colorado? And I don't mean to focus so much on Colorado, but I'm hoping that it's going to spur some ideas about things that maybe are already happening in Kansas or could happen here in Kansas. So Denver established a group that was thinking about what it wanted to do for the future of food. This was a mayoral advisory committee on the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council. And so they created this food vision and then have subsequently released pieces of an action plan. And part of what's included in the food vision is that at least 25% of all institutional procurement and purchases is going to come through Denver's municipal government supply chain from produced within Colorado, right? So they're going to buy 25% local, essentially, within the city and county. So the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council, as I mentioned, is mayoral appointed, and so they are the ones charged with coming up with ideas for how to actually set these procurement standards, and then they pass them on to the governor, who then to the mayor, who then ultimately decides whether or not that they're going to adopt them. But one of the things that I would challenge everyone to consider is, are the right people at the table? And I think the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council is a fantastic group, right? They're all volunteers, they're very motivated, but for example, I think there's not strong supply chain representation, right? And we certainly don't have any farmers and ranchers of scale because they're not in the city. And so I think that just based on that, it may limit some of the potential solutions that they come up with that are going to meet sort of a broader set of goals. So one of the things that they've been pursuing is something called the Good Food Purchasing Program. Has folks heard of the Good Food Purchasing Program? Not? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. So this, the Good Food Purchasing Program was started in Los Angeles by the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, and then it was essentially spun off into its own nonprofit. The center gets a lot of its funding from the Kellogg Foundation, but it has a broad array of partners now. And what they've tried to do in order to maybe simplify some of the decisions that a municipality that would want to have this kind of values-based procurement would do, right? You can imagine as a city trying to manage a procurement process that incorporates values can be really difficult, right? In terms of verification, all those kinds of things, how do you set up the standards? And so they've tried to create and make it a little bit more simplified for others that are interested in participating. What they've done is to take existing third-party certification programs, so things like organic, USDA organic inspection, and integrate it into what they have as these 5 pillars. So organic would be under environmental sustainability. And they've tried to have a pretty broad array of pillars, right, that they're thinking about so that it's fairly comprehensive. And you can see this is a map of places around the country that have already adopted it. And so these are not small cities, right? New York City has adopted it, Chicago's adopted it, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and there are many more conversations happening across the country about adopting this program, right, and adopting these procurement standards. But as I've hopefully built up the story, one of the concerns we've had at Colorado State is that because it's often these food policy councils that are leading these conversations, and because they may not have representation of the supply chain businesses and of producers, especially producers of scale and rural producers at the table, they may not have information on what the impacts of this type of policy may have along the supply chain. So we were fortunate at Colorado State. We got a large grant from the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, which was established through the 2014 Farm Bill as a separate foundation. We got a large grant from them. Actually, that was matched by several of our commodity groups, including Colorado Wheat and the Colorado Potato Administrative Committee. And what we're trying to do is build a model that actually helps us to understand what are the trade-offs along the supply chain, right, from this type of procurement policy. And another reason we're particularly interested in this is that I mentioned the Good Food Purchasing Program was started in Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles has very different growing conditions than we have in Colorado. And indeed, in Colorado, we have all of these microclimates. I don't know if we're unique in this, but we have 9 ag experiment stations around Colorado, right? We have an ag experiment station with 9 research centers. And I think that's because we have all of these microclimates and incredible heterogeneity in terms of the farm and ranch land that we have. And so we want to be able to really understand what some of these trade-offs are, and we want to be able to provide that information then to our Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council that then is ultimately making these recommendations to the mayor. And so we're building this model, which I won't go into the details about, but it allows us to look at these trade-offs. And so just as an example, we focused on four commodities, and we focused on 4 commodities because that supply chain data can be so difficult to get, right, because it's mostly the private sector that has it. And so one of our commodities is wheat. And so, for example, we shock our model with something like the Denver Public Schools decide to purchase organic wheat, or they decide to purchase source-identified wheat, so it's actually verified that it's from Colorado, or they try to purchase something like whole grain white wheat, right, which of course we've developed as part of our wheat breeding program at CSU. And so we look at those different things, and we look at what happens if the percentage of those purchases change, or all of them change, and then what some of the impacts might be. And we have a lot of data that we've incorporated into this model, but I'll tell you one of the interesting things that I wouldn't have realized before we started is that many of the decisions that are made are not going to be made, right, based on a producer wanting to be a profit maximizer, right? Shocking. And so things like a shift to organic, right? There's huge stigma against organic wheat production. I'm sure the same probably holds here. And that one of the things we can see is that some of our wheat growers may be more likely to shift to organic production if they have neighbors that are already growing organic. And so we don't actually include that in our model, understanding that there's this price premium that's available, right? And that actually, even with the additional cost of production, we see that on average, right, those producers are doing better. That's not enough to get our producers to shift. And so thinking about some of those things, and I think that's been a really interesting project to work on. And we can do things then up and down the supply chain, like understand how that shift to whole grain white wheat actually impacts dietary quality in school meals, as well as what are the impacts then on soil erosion. And this is one of the other things we've been trying to talk to the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council about. A colleague on the team, Megan Shapansky, who's in the Department of Soil and Crop Science at CSU, she does research looking at some of these environmental trade-offs about certified organic wheat production, right? Because you're not practicing no-till, and therefore, you have all of these negative erosion impacts. And so we're really trying to look at that. I think getting some of maybe our urban partners to understand that some of these certifications are not so black and white. It's not like you become organic, you have better environmental practices, and we're trying to really get them to understand more of that nuance. As you can imagine, it's tough to try to get some of our rural partners and our urban partners to work together, but we think it's worth doing. So we've been having a series of smaller convenings to try to actually bring stakeholders who don't always come to the table together. So this is an ad from a meeting we had in Gunnison, Colorado. We held it in Gunnison, Colorado on purpose because we wanted to show to our producer partners that the Denver market opportunities and Denver policymakers were willing to travel to them. And I think that was a really important sort of political statement to make. So we went out there. We started with an evening that was social where we bought the drinks. And I have to say that I think that this is a great way to start. We had no agenda. But we built some trust, right? We had some interesting conversations, and it was great. Actually, the only thing we did that was formal that night was a food systems bingo game. So we really tried to keep it light and to get people just talking about whatever they wanted to talk about before we started with the formal agenda, and I recommend that approach. So there were some hard conversations that took place at that meeting, but I think it helped a little bit, right? I mean, we're trying to think about how do you actually evaluate what the impact is, but at least to start getting people to a point where urban folks are not doing this because they don't like farmers and they don't like rural places, right? They're doing it because they're well-intentioned, they just don't understand what they don't understand. And similarly, I think for our rural producers, right, they're not necessarily as engaged in what's happening in an urban place and some of the urban challenges that they are trying to address through this values-based procurement. So those conversations are important. Here's some pictures of the event. It was an interesting meeting. So we've been holding producer meetings. And what we've been trying to do with these producer meetings is something we've been calling a scenario analysis. So what we've been doing is taking things that are happening through the Good Food Purchasing Program and bringing them to the commodity group meetings and saying, okay, if there's this kind of certification, how many people are already doing it, right? How many acres do we already have represented? Who could do it? Who could do it if there was a premium of 10% or 25%? And then which of these things are just deal breakers because of certain growing or other types of conditions? And we've been trying to put that information together to give a better sense to Denver of, at least before we have these meetings, of some of what we're hearing, from out in the field. So we're bringing all these pieces together, and we're going to hold the first ever Colorado Food Summit that's really focused on advancing food policies that support urban-rural connections. And I think, I've gotten some pushback on this a little bit because I think folks maybe want this convening to be broader, but at least in my experience, I found that the times that I have failed is because I've tried to be everything to everyone, and that having a more narrow focus I think is important. And I think trying to have a venue where we can actually bridge some of these conversations is important, right? And talk about things that are about building urban-rural linkages. I think what I'm most proud about this convening that's going to happen, even if the convening is a complete failure, what I'm most proud about is that if you look at the list of our partners, it includes most of the commodity groups, and it also includes our stakeholders from the city and county. And I think we've brought a really unique group of partners to the table. And trust me, that's been a lot of work, and it's taken a lot of social capital to do that, but I'm really proud about that. So, to end here, I think for these sort of institutional procurement strategies to work, we need to consider a few things that I wanted to highlight. So one is, are you creating markets that work with a scale, commodity, or whatever else of producer at the table? And I don't think we spend enough time really thinking about this, right? So I think a lot of our For example, the USDA Ag Marketing Service grants around the Farmers Market Promotion Program or Local Food Promotion Program, or things where with the FINI program, which is now the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, we often try to marry these programs that are going to both create market opportunities for farmers and ranchers, and oftentimes with the groups that are doing them, there's a focus on small and mid-scale farmers and ranchers, with creating or opportunities for low-income households to purchase more local, healthy food. I do not think that those things always belong together, and I think that we would probably see more successes in a lot of these programs if we didn't bring those things together. Small farmers and ranchers have to get premiums for what they're doing, or they're going to end up in that danger zone, right? They have higher costs of production. We have lots of evidence to support that. And so they have to be able to differentiate and get a premium. And low-income consumers do not necessarily have that premium available to spend. And so we need to think about, if we're creating markets for small and mid-scale farmers and ranchers, that's probably good enough. If we're creating opportunities to get healthier food to low-income consumers, that's probably good enough. And I don't think we always have to marry those things. So we have to consider the scale and commodity. I will say that the wheat growers have been fantastic partners, but I think they're the hardest people to convince that there may be opportunities for them through some of this Denver procurement. Because one of our wheat growers could supply all of the wheat for all of the flour, for all of the bread for Denver for a year, right? So they are not thinking that this is like a silver bullet for them, and with really good reason. Now, I don't think that there are silver bullets, and I think there's still reasons for them to be at the table. For example, I may not emphasize this enough, the Good Food Purchasing Program, the local economies is only one piece of what they're thinking about. And so, as we have these cities across the country that are adopting this value-based procurement, there may be opportunities for our Colorado wheat growers, and maybe even Kansas wheat growers, around who have adopted certain types of environmental certifications or some of these other programs that the Good Food Purchasing Program is incentivizing, right? And so I think that's how we've been trying to talk about it and sell it, because otherwise I think it can be a hard sell for good reason. You know, why come to the table? And so this is just an example, right, of what I've been saying about the cost of production, right? This is for U.S. dairy farmers. And so this is the cost of production by the herd size, and you can see just cost of production go down the scale, right? It's just the truth, right? What economies of scale is all about. Schools, for example, don't have much money to pay a premium for local products, right? And so thinking about all of these programs to try to incentivize local procurement may not have the desired effect we want, or to do this successfully, we have to get large growers involved because they're the only ones who can afford to sell the products there. Now, I'm sort of exaggerating a little bit. I think there may be some opportunities for special events, right, that schools do where it's not overall procurement. But we have to think about the economics of farming when we're thinking about who the right producers are to involve in this kind of conversation, and that's really important. And I think, and I don't know if this is true in Kansas, but I've talked to a lot of producers around the country that are selling into schools not because they make money doing it, but because they want to make sure that those kids get access to healthy, good food. Now that's great, right? And that's all well and good, but that is not creating an economic opportunity for our producers. So let's really keep that in mind. Especially as 42% of our school districts are now participating in farm to school, right? So let's try to be realistic about what some of those opportunities are. I think one of the opportunities is to try to get more seconds into the schools, right? These are products that are great. There's nothing really wrong with them. So for example, with our potato growers, we have mostly a fresh potato industry in Colorado, and it's by far and away our largest vegetable crop. And so we've been trying to think about, for the small potatoes that our producers really don't get very much money on. Those are perfect. They're like kid-sized potatoes, right? So let's try to get those into the school. But that, of course, means that if the school's going to prepare them, they have to have the right kitchen facilities to be able to do that, right? And we're trying to build out some of those relationships. Our peach growers, right? So anyone had Palisade peaches? They're delicious, right? Our Palisade peaches are delicious. And I mentioned, right, the labor is the largest challenge that those growers are telling me that they're facing. Once our peaches are actually harvested, the numbers I'm hearing from our growers is that we're composting about 20% of them, right? Because we have no processing capacity on our western slope. So are there some opportunities, right, where we can build up some processing capacity and then get those delicious peaches in a frozen state or other state into our classrooms? We've been working with ranchers out in the northwest corner of the state. As anyone who's ever been out to the northwest corner of Colorado knows, we have that 6-day growing season. So we grow grass out there. but that's a bit. And so, we've been trying to think about, are there some opportunities to get some cull cows into the schools, right? We've actually got some processing capacity out there. We've got 2 USDA inspected processing facilities, which is pretty incredible. Can we actually develop more of a market for these cull cows that there's great, basically producers are really not getting very much for them right now. So one of the things that we tried to do to actually facilitate those opportunities is 2 weeks ago, my colleague Martha Sellens, who's an extension, launched something called the Meat School. And we hear quite frequently, in fact I was talking about this last night, in many of our rural communities that we don't have enough small-scale meat processing capacity, right? Especially for the USDA inspected plants. Well, I can't speak to Kansas, but I can tell you Colorado that I don't think that it's as big a challenge as what we hear. And I think that more of the challenge has to do with seasonal constraints, right? So hunting season, they've got a bottleneck. And that we don't have good communication between our ranchers and our processors. And these are very slim margins that these small-scale meat processors are working off of, right? Very small margins. So the idea that we're going to build this new facility and it's going to make money and solve all of our problems, or that we're going to be able to find somebody who can actually run it, right? I mean, those are really hard things. So what we were trying to think about is how do we better build bridges along the supply chain? So we've been working with Oregon State University. They have the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network there, NPAM, which has great resources. And they've done things like develop processing sheets, right? So that we can actually have more standardized sheets that, cutting sheets that both our processors are using and our ranchers are using, so that we have a clearer understanding about what can we do and more transparency and better communication along that chain. And, I encourage you to go take a look. It's a little hard to see here, but all of this is online, and we are trying to think about how we might be able to expand this in future years. Right now, we're only offering it to existing ranchers, which I think is important for some of the conversations we're having. So this, I think, leads in really well to this next point, is the right infrastructure in place, right? Of course, you don't have an opportunity to get beef into the schools if you don't have USDA-inspected facilities. But it's better to utilize existing assets before trying to create new ones. And I think often when I go and talk to communities, there's this emphasis on trying to create new businesses. Well, that is very, very hard to do. And there are many USDA programs that we are underutilizing in rural America to support expansion. So when I go and meet with these small-scale meat processing facilities, I try to understand in the next 5 years, if they were given $1 million, where would they put that money? And you may think I'm exaggerating about that sort of level of support, but if you haven't met with your Economic Development Administration recently, they have money to support this, especially in opportunity zones. USDA has money. I mean, there's a lot of money we're leaving on the table in rural America. I know sometimes I work in communities where they just say, they don't want the government handout. Well, to me, this money's already available. Let's go and take advantage of it. Oh, so I should say I put this together with a graduate student. We got information from the Colorado Department of Agriculture on where existing manufacturing businesses were across the state that are buying products from farms and ranches, and we put this together. And I think what I love about this slide is that I think it always shows that there's more out there than people realize, right? And thinking about how do we sort of grow these businesses that already exist. We've been doing some work with Ardent Mills, right? Of course, they're based in Denver. And Ardent Mills, they do a lot of work with Colorado wheat, but I think one of the things that's interesting is that they started this thing called the Annex a few years ago. Has anyone heard of the Annex by Ardent Mills? So this is where they have all of their differentiated products. So it's basically anything that's sold by the pound, right? I think that's a good way to think about it. And so we had the San Luis Valley of Colorado, some growers who are really thinking about what can they do to shift to some water-saving crops. Because of the Colorado Water Plan, we have to take 45,000 acres out of irrigated production in the San Luis Valley. 45,000. And so they're really thinking about what are the rotations, right? Maybe shifting away from barley in the rotation. And so we have some growers who actually have shifted to quinoa because something about the conditions down there make it really nice for quinoa. Started growing quinoa, started talking to Ardent Mills in the Annex. And Ardent Mills actually decided to make some investment in quinoa processing. And so unfortunately, the bulk of the investment is being made in Omaha, Nebraska, so that's a bummer. And it's because I think of two main things. One is that Ardent Mills wanted to bring all of its gluten-free processing together in one central location, but two, because of some of the water challenges, and my understanding is that processing quinoa is very water intensive, but they did make some investments in some of the pre-processing that had to happen, and it did create an opportunity for our growers, right, to diversify what they were doing and to grow a higher value crop. And we've been trying to work with a smaller processor, like a Bay State Milling, right, who actually has a line of Colorado source verified wheat. And we're trying to look at, flour. We're trying to think about, is this a product that we can actually get into some of our schools, right, that's more differentiated. And the last thing, as I've said, is are the right people at the table. Most of these councils, I don't think, are effectively connecting rural urban stakeholders, and it takes a lot of work, and I think it really takes people who have built those connections and have relationships. And so we're doing a lot of work in that end. I think that the role of an agricultural economic development specialist can be those people can be uniquely positioned to help create these linkages. I know we have a new director of extension who's going to be coming in starting December 1st, and this is something I'm going to be advocating for in our state. I think when I was in that role, we were able to set up a bunch of new companies, and I think having somebody who can help to facilitate some of the networking among producers as well as to understand some markets and to try to build those connections, I think was a very valuable position. And Cornell has actually invested a lot of resources in developing these agricultural economic development specialists. In Colorado, we've also created a producer advisory committee, and we've tried to create this committee now to weigh in and to meet specifically with the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council. We haven't convened them yet, we've just gotten them on board. But I think what I'm proud of here is that we did reach out to all of the commodity groups who produce food for human consumption, but we also included some of the groups that maybe are not always represented in like the State Advisory Council, like the National Young Farmers Coalition. We also have the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and Colorado Farm Bureau, and so hoping to have better representation sort of across all different scales of commodities and agriculture. And this isn't just to weigh in on some of these food policies, but a city like Denver is actually trying to make some investments in different types of terminal markets, for example. And there hasn't been, I think, especially producers of scale that have been able to engage in those conversations, and I think we're sort of uniquely positioned to help facilitate that. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear from me, but I really appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with all of you. I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about some of the things that we're doing at CSU, or to go to the website Local Food Economics. It is supposed to be a community of practice, and so we encourage you to join. We'd love to have your examples that we can actually add to that website. So thank you.
I appreciate having some examples from Colorado and neighbor states. I think a lot of work that we're doing here in Kansas resonates with some of the work that you all are doing in Colorado as well. I do want to put a plug in for a session that we have this afternoon where we're bringing together a few folks and talking about the food shed here in Wichita. And we actually have some chefs and some folks working on a Wichita food plan. So I encourage you all to come to that session to maybe expand on some of the things that Becca talked about here this morning. So we have a few minutes. I recognize that we started a little bit late this morning, so I want to give you all time to ask Becca some questions before we break for the next round of breakouts. Any questions?
As a small producer of bison meat here in the state of Kansas, one of the things I run into in doing direct sales of my product to restaurants is that they've already got a food purveyor. And two of the main food purveyors in Kansas are Evco and Cisco. And both of those places will make their contract with the restaurant that they're contracted with clause along that they don't buy any food other than food provided by Cisco or Evco. And so in many cases, my personal relationship with the manager or the owners of that restaurant and their interest in providing bison burgers on their menu is the only thing that gets me through the door. And for them to do that, they need to be able to be willing to tell Cisco or Evco to screw off. And that's what's happened every time. They want to put it on the menu, and they say, we want to buy it locally from a guy in town. And they say, you can't do that. And usually, if the restaurant is competent and confident in itself, they'll say, you know what, we buy enough from you under contract that if you want to drop us, go ahead. And they don't. They let them make that one sale to me, and they go on with their normal contract. But it's still an obstacle that I have to overcome when I walk through the door and try to get someone to buy my food if they've already signed that contract that says they won't let those food purveyors won't let me in, or that they shouldn't buy from anybody else because they're under contract to only buy it from them. And Cisco sees that this is taking business from them because they offer an inferior bison burger to what I produce because it's not grass-fed, it's been fed grains, all the negative things that go with feedlotting and poor animal management. Those bison producers are basically being cattle people, and they're not being bison ranchers. But for naturally raised, holistic, on-the-field, grass-fed sort of product, which they don't offer, they realize they're giving up some sales to me. And my sales are small. I'm taking maybe $100 out of their pocket in a month, maybe $200 on a good month. But that is something we run into here as small producers, is you might have a restaurant that'll take you on, but if they've already got a food purveyor, they're under contract not to. Thank you.
So I think this goes back to the point I made earlier about restaurants not being great markets. The restaurants in general are small, right? And they all, I mean, not to say that there aren't some restaurant groups, right? But in general, restaurants just don't have the power over distributors like I think some of these larger institutions have. My sense is that, and I'm not advocating for the Good Food Purchasing Program. If there is interest in shifting to a values-based procurement strategy, right, and having these different types of standards, that ultimately the benefit of having a single certifier, like the Good Food Purchasing Program, and many cities adopting this, is that they are going to have the power now to actually shift what some of these food distribution companies are doing. Because they're going to have to be tracking a number of different things through their SKUs and other things in order to be able to verify that X buyer is doing these things. I think it's really, really hard to work with restaurants because they just don't buy at a scale that a Cisco is going to pay attention to. So I think the shift is coming. I don't think restaurants are going to lead the way. I think the thing that restaurants are really good for is that, especially with these celebrity chefs, right? A celebrity chef can do something and then people notice, or it's on like Food TV or whatever those channels are, and then it can shift, right? Or it gets put in a magazine or something. But I don't think that that's where we're going to, they're not going to be able to shift what a Cisco decides to do. All right.
I'm from Nebraska. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry had considerable impact on the local and regional food language and titles in the Farm Bill. And I've had some conversations with him. One of the hot button items that I noticed with him is that he recognizes the health benefits of local food to the consumer. And I'm wondering if you think that in the future this is going to be a big factor in the marketing recognition of the health benefits of local food.
I don't think we actually have research on the health benefits of local foods. I think it's something people assume to be true. And I can tell you, we just did a study in Colorado that was funded through the USA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And we did an in-school experiment, which if anyone's actually done an in-school experiment, these things are hard, right? Because, especially if you're trying to do it at any scale, teachers all do things differently in the classrooms. So, making sure that they're all doing the same thing is a real challenge. But anyway, so we focused on the fresh fruit and vegetable program. I don't know if everyone's familiar with this, but essentially it's better than a lunchroom because in the lunchroom, first of all, our kids have like 15 minutes to eat now, right? And then there's all these other confounding factors that influences what kids eat, like how many kids are sitting at the lunch table, right? If there's more kids, they eat less. Or if their lunch is before or after recess. So there's all these confounding factors. So we focused on the fresh fruit and vegetable program because there the snack is brought to the classroom and kids have two choices. One is they take the snack, and two is they decide how much of it they eat. So it's a very, very clean thing. So we did this in 4 schools, I think it was 82 classrooms, and for products that we could get for local and non-local. And there were challenges with it, so we haven't published it in the peer-reviewed literature yet, but I'll tell you, we found that there were no differences in what kids ate, if it was local versus non-local, and we didn't find, so in terms of the health benefits, right, one of the main arguments is that kids consume more fruits and vegetables if they know it's local and they like that it's from a farm and they hear this story. Well, in our case, we didn't find that at all to be true. And we also just we published in the peer-reviewed literature an article on child benefits, so the kid benefits specifically of the farm-to-school programs. And what we see is that most interventions are multi-component. So they don't just have one thing like taste testing, they do all of these different things. And so the ones that have huge amounts of money and effort put into them seem to be successful in terms of kid benefits. But what school districts have the funding to do that, right? So, you can see like Boston's put a big effort in. So I can give you all the citation for that, but you can't really go and evaluate which of the pieces have bigger impacts. And there's not a single good study, what we would consider good, where it has like a control group and non-control group, on specifically farm to school that exists in the peer-reviewed literature. So I think, I'm not saying these things don't have an impact in terms of health outcomes, but we do not have the research to show that right now. So I think it's just something that makes people feel good about that, right? I mean, that's why I was trying to talk about what do we actually know. I think the evidence we have is that these local and regional food markets do create some opportunities for small and mid-scale farmers and ranchers and beginning farmers and ranchers. I think we have evidence of that. There is a pathway to profitability through these kinds of differentiated markets. I think the kid thing is much harder.
One more burning question. Your chart where you had the quartiles by income, and so to me it's still like astonishing that there's so many people under the line, even though I know conventional agriculture is the same. But did that include family living expenses?
So, it depends how somebody keeps their financial records, right? So, correctly they shouldn't, right? But it depends how someone maintains their financial records. So what I'm trying to say is that it's possible that some of those family living expenses get lumped into what they're doing in the operation, right?
That was not your intention, unless it.
No. I mean, all we're doing is using the data from the ARMS survey, from the Agricultural Resource Management Survey.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and break, but can we give Becca a run?